But yes, I'm Jamie Pearson. I'm the CEO of Bhang. Bhang's 12 years old. We were born in a warehouse in Oakland 12 years ago when cannabis was really, it was still medical in California at that time, and the industry was just coming into its own. So think about 2012 where cannabis was. So 10 years later, almost 13, it'll be 13 years next month. We've been around a long time. Now we're in 7 US states. We're the number 1, number 2, and number 6 chocolate in Canada. For the first year of Cannabis 2.0 in Canada, we were the number 1 SKU. We outsold any SKU of flower, of pre-roll in Canada. So we've done very, very well across the world. We have CBD that's in Europe, and we've been in Europe for about 5 years. We're gonna skip the 2 COVID years because that doesn't count. We all skip the 2 COVID years, right? And what Alex asked me to do was talk to you guys about how cannabis is going to impact the recession. So I just want to take a little bit of a show of hands. How many of you are German in this room? Okay. And then how many Americans do we have? Oh, okay, 5. And then I met a bunch of people yesterday from Thailand. Yay. And then just regular European non-Germans. Okay, so I think I covered, what did I miss? Israel, what? Australia, welcome. New Zealand. What? Colombia, South America, awesome. What? Uruguay, oh, the country that started the whole movement going legal, federally legal. Welcome. So truly an international group. Not that many people here yet, but we are expecting a couple hundred here. What I'm talking about today is how cannabis is going to impact, or could potentially impact, the recession that I think. Raise your hand if you think we're in a recession. Because I think Europe and America are pretty similar. So the Americans are saying yes, the Europeans not so much. How is South America doing? Same. I mean, it's just turbulent times in the economies because we're all responding to what happened with COVID. So the question is, are we in a recession? Maybe, likely. No one's going to argue that the economic times are certain. I think we're all in agreement that we're in uncertain times right now. I think cannabis can play an important role. I better silence my phone here. In righting the ship, but the key here is going to be that legislators are going to need to get it right. And I think what we can all agree on, is, especially in the US, is legislators have not done a good job of getting it right, because I think a lot of the legislation comes in America based in fear. And what I'm really hoping is that in other places where cannabis is coming into its own, and I got to give big kudos to Thailand. You guys have done some making cannabis legal and then giving plants to people, groundbreaking stuff. And that's really kind of grabbing the industry and saying, we're going to embrace it. I think we can do that in Europe. I think the Germans, personally, I have a special affinity for Deutschland. Und meine Kinder sind hier, die sind beide deutsche Bürgerschafter, die haben beide deutsche Pässe. Und ich habe selbst in Deutschland gewohnt und ich habe gesehen, wie das funktioniert, wenn Gesetze in Ordnung gemacht werden und wenn die Leute die Gesetze folgen. Und ich glaube, dass in Deutschland, wir können das eigentlich super, eine Möglichkeit, alles gut zu machen, und wir können lernen von was Amerika falsch gemacht hat. So, I'm going to go back into English. I think that we can learn in Germany, and you guys are getting ready to go rec. You're going to go adult use here. You can learn from the mistakes that we made in the US. And I think if you get your legislation right, you could actually impact the recession and give yourself a new bucket of money. So technically, the definition of a recession is if you have 2 quarters of negative economic growth. So your GDP goes backwards for 2 consecutive quarters. That's the technical definition of a recession. In the US, we're about any day they're gonna announce Q2 results, and we think that they're gonna show that it went backwards, and that means that Q1 went backwards and Q2 went backwards, and we will technically be in a recession. Here's the issue. The people who are charged with naming the recession are called the NBER. It is the National Bureau of Economic Research. So it's an 8-member panel, nonpartisan. They are the ones that say whether or not it's been a recession. Looks like for the first time in history, that 8-member panel is going to say we're not in a recession, despite the fact that we've gone backwards 2 quarters in a row. And we've never seen that, it's unprecedented. But the reason that is probably gonna happen is because we have the lowest unemployment in about 70 years. We're hovering right around 3.4% in the US of unemployment. So you've got this strong job situation, but the economy's moving backwards. And then you couple that with inflation that we haven't seen the likes of in about 40 years. And we haven't really seen anything like this economically, so we can't just go back and learn from history. So what I'm gonna do is take you back. We're gonna talk about what's happened historically in recessions, and then we're gonna talk about how cannabis can play a role in that. And I'd like you to raise your hand. How many of you are cannabis entrepreneurs? How many of you are investors? Okay, so there's only a few investors. So I've geared this talk to investors, but I think what I'll do is just on the fly shift over to the entrepreneurs. Okay, so are we in a recession? Maybe, likely, but regardless, we can use cannabis to get ourselves out of it. So over here in Germany, the economy is also arguably in a recession. In the research that I did, several prominent economists said, yeah, we're probably in a recession. Regardless, we're all recovering from the pandemic's impact on all of our economies, right? So we also have interesting things going on like the climate crisis. And we have an alarming increase in nationalistic politics. We've got the Brexit, and we've got the Trumpers, and we've got all this weird politics going on. And apologize if you're a Trumper. And then, what we basically have is a financial crisis sitting over a Bunsen burner because we've got all this other stuff happening. And at this moment in time, on top of all of that, we have the war in Ukraine, and that is arguably also impacting the supply chain, not just the pandemic, but now the war in Ukraine is affecting wheat and it's affecting gas. And I think the biggest thing that people are talking about is Russian oil and Russian natural gas. And there's a big fear that Russia's gonna shut off the natural gas supply to Germany. And if that happens, the German economy is gonna be in trouble. And that is the one thing that everybody agrees upon. So I'm not trying to scare all of you, but what I do wanna do is kind of give you a backdrop of where the economic times are and how cannabis could potentially figure into this. Because what you basically have is massive inflation. Now, inflation always impacts consumers and consumer goods because people stop spending money when things get expensive, right? So we have this massive inflation, we have a recession, we have our economy shrinking, we've got a war going on, we've got a climate crisis, and things are uncertain. And so we're sitting here saying, how do we as an industry impact all of that in a positive way? And I think we can do that. And so investors have a right to be worried. And then here's the last thing. Bhang is a public company, so I watch the markets pretty closely, and we are what's considered a trough bear market. So raise your hand if you know what a trough bear market is. Okay, so a bear market's when you've got a 20% shrinkage of price across the board. Doesn't matter if it's what sector. So if it's across all sectors, you've gone from bull to bear. A trough bear is when it's more than 35% and it's more than 2 quarters in a row. We've been more than 35% across all sectors for many, many, many quarters. So it's unprecedented what's happening in the capital markets. It basically means liquidity has dried up. So we can all agree it's really hard to get money. When you're in cannabis, it's hard to get money anyway. So if you're in cannabis trying to get money and you're trying to get money in a trough bear market, and then you have all of that backdrop that I just laid out for you, the question is, how do cannabis entrepreneurs build an industry in the middle of all of that? And I think one of the things is we have to talk to our legislators about what's actually happening. The other thing is, if you're an investor and you're liquid, this is where fortunes are going to be made, because there is a lot of opportunity out in the world. You can buy pretty much across the sector 35% back of normal pricing. So liquid people are going to go get richer. And the really good news for cannabis investors, and this is where the entrepreneurs need to perk up, is that our entire industry is not going to function across normal market sectors. We're going to function like alcohol and tobacco. And alcohol and tobacco in tough economic times actually have an increase in demand. Makes sense, we're all depressed, we want to get drunk, right? But the difference is now we're in this massive inflationary environment and we can't afford top shelf liquor, so what do consumers do? They go get the cheaper alternative. Here's where the rub is. If you're in cannabis, what's the cheaper alternative to legal cannabis? Illegal cannabis. So it actually is going to serve, if legislators don't get this right, it's going to blow up the illicit market. Because people are crunched. They're not going to stop buying cannabis. They're going to buy more cannabis. But if they want to buy more cannabis, they've got to buy it at cheaper prices. So if your legislators overtax it, if they overtest it, if they do all of these things that we've seen in California, I'll give you an example. Bhang was born in California. In California, they test the plant before it goes to be blasted into oil. Then they test the oil. Then you need another test when it goes to the distributor. Then when it goes from the distributor to the manufacturer, you need another test. And then when you get it from the manufacturer and you put it in the product, you need another test before it goes to the retail market. The same cannabis is tested 4 times. Each one of those tests costs anywhere from $800 to $1,500. So if I'm gonna put 5,000 SKUs into the market, it's gonna add whatever that math is to my sales price at each juncture. So it continues to increase the price, increase the price, increase the price. It's also taxed at all of those levels. So now I make a chocolate bar that costs anywhere from $2 to $3 to manufacture. Guess what the retail price of my chocolate bar is in California? $20. And about 80% of that goes to taxes. So there's no profit being made because the government has their hand out at every level of that process. What we're trying to get done in New York is we're trying to get New York to understand, look, you've already invented the wheel. You've got bodegas on every corner that sell alcohol and tobacco. You already have distribution. You already know how to give these people permits so you can make money on the permit of 200,000 bodegas, and then you can limit how much they can sell, but you can let them sell at the corner store. So the woman in curlers doesn't call her plug. She goes to the corner store and buys legal, clean, tested cannabis. So if you open the barrier of entry and you allow all the citizens to access safe, clean cannabis and you don't tax it to death, think about how much money they'll make in New York by giving everybody access to it, because guess what? Everybody already has access to it in New York. It is the largest nascent cannabis market in the world. The statistics are 200 metric tons of cannabis are sold on the island of Manhattan every year. And I did not make that number up. It's a little bit of a low estimate. I've heard it much higher. I've heard the lower estimate is 40 metric tons of cannabis. Well, guess where all that comes from? It comes from California. And that's the Californians selling it out the back door because it's the only way they can keep themselves in business. We can learn from that here. So what we need to do is really urge the legislators to do a few things. So I made a list. The list is, number 1, I'm going to go back here and talk about the recession again because I know we all love that. Reasonable tax rates. So they should take their money in volume rather than having a few people allowed to do cannabis and then taxing them to death. And if you tax it too much, you're gonna drive people to the illicit market. They should have lots of retail access points. If you give them lots of retail access points, they have no reason to go to the nascent market. Reasonable and achievable barrier of entry, meaning if you are a legacy cannabis person, you've admittedly been breaking the law for all of these years. So in the industry, I call them the roots and the suits. So we're sitting here with all the suits. The roots are the people that made sure cannabis was available when our laws did not allow cannabis to be available on the open, openly. We need to embrace the roots. We need to let those people into the market, and we need to lower the barrier of entry for them to get into the market, because the suits have a lot to learn from the roots. And if we do that, we're not gonna drive people to the illicit market, because what we're going to do is bring the illicit market into the legal market, which means we're going to invite all of the people who know everything about growing. We're gonna grow better cannabis, we're gonna provide better cannabis, and we're gonna have all of those lessons that they've learned over the last 20 years, and we're gonna elevate the entire industry by bringing the roots in. A lot of the suits will say to me, yeah, and they need us because we're gonna teach them how to do KPIs and we're gonna teach them how to do business. And I'm gonna tell you, if you've been running a business in an era that's illegal, and you've been able to skirt all of those laws, you're still growing, you're still packaging, you're still manufacturing, and you're still selling at a retail level. They have more to teach us about running a business than we probably have to teach them. Probably what we need to do is really embrace the roots at a core level, and then we can just teach them our vernacular. They need to learn about 15 vocabulary words, and then we're all gonna be on the same playing field. So we bring the roots into the game. And then the next thing we need to do is have strong social equity programs. And that's because the war on drugs in the US, and I've read in Europe, has been a war on race. It is not about quashing drugs. Governments know that everyone's using drugs. What the cannabis war on drugs has been is putting Black and brown people in prison. And what we need to do is get all the Black and brown people out of prison, and we need to give them entry into this legal market. And when we do that, as an industry, we reduce the amount of people that go into the illicit market. And then we also reduce the number of taxes that we pay keeping people in prison. Here's a big one. Governments need to allow cannabis in all its forms. People want edibles. They want beverages, they want concentrates, they want all of these products. And what governments do is they go, ooh, we're scared, we think we're only gonna let you have flour. And then people who want edibles are gonna go get edibles in the illicit market. What the government needs to do is accept that cannabis is here, that people are using it, and they need to let us have it in all of its forms. And when we do that, we actually then increase the legal market, the ability to tax the legal market, the bucket of money gets bigger, and this is a way to combat the recession. Because it's the first time in my lifetime that there's a new bucket of money. So think about it, we've always played Monopoly with taxes. Oh, we're gonna give it to the military. And then we're like, no, I'm a Democrat, I'm gonna give it to education. It's the same dollar, we're just moving it around on the playing field. But if what we do is go get a new dollar from the illicit market, we actually now can increase our economy by the impact that cannabis will have on it. What we need to do is accept that cannabis is here, it's legal, and we need to give the people who want it access to it in all of its forms. And the last thing that I think governments need to do, hope you're all taking notes and that you're gonna go talk to your legislators, because this is what really needs to happen. I've been doing this for 12 years. I've watched countries, states, legislators get it wrong. And then we always end up back at the same spot. I watched California. Do you know that we have the biggest illicit market in the United States in California? There were 3,000 legal dispensaries on 12/31/2017. And California went rec on 1/1/2018, and there were 300 legal dispensaries the next day. But guess what? There were 2,700 illicit shops because none of them closed. So then what happens is the consumer has no idea that they're buying from an illegal store. And those dollars are not going into the tax bucket. They're going into now somebody's hands who does not have to lab test and who does not have to pay taxes. So the last thing that governments need to do is stop doing milligram limits. They think they're somehow protecting us. So all of a sudden in California, you could buy 1,000 milligram chocolate bar or cookie or concentrate, and the next day after cannabis was made legal recreationally, you could only buy 100 milligrams. Well, guess what everyone did? They kept buying their 1,000 milligram cookie. They just bought it in the illegal market. So these are the lessons that we can learn. And if you do these things, if Germany gets this right, and if they allow home grow, and they allow consumption lounges, and they allow high milligrams, and they allow cannabis in all of its forms, and they embrace social equity, and they lower the barrier of entry, and they let you go buy cannabis in Aldi. You can go buy liquor in Aldi. If they do those things, they're gonna have a bigger bucket of money to help their economy. They're gonna be able to control the cannabis market because they're gonna actually have access at the point of sale of the data. They're gonna know who's buying it, how much they're buying. But when it's in the illicit market, we have no idea what's happening, right? And then you allow a free market economy to function the way it's supposed to. Because people who are doing good business stay in business. And people who are not doing good business don't make it. And that is the hallmark of a free market business economy. Let them do business and let them fail if they're gonna fail and let them succeed if they're gonna succeed. But when you legislate them to death, everything becomes fake. So what happens now is we're in this recession. We've got this high inflation. We have an opportunity in Germany. And it's really exciting. You guys are gonna get your rules any day. And what I'm reading is everyone's predicting that it's gonna go rec on 1/1/2023, and then it'll take a year for them to get their rules correct, and the first legal cannabis will be sold probably sometime in 2024. So it's gonna take a couple of years for all of that to get going. But it's groups like this that can speak to their legislatures and say, go learn from Colorado, go learn from Washington, go learn from Massachusetts. And that brings me to the next point. Germany is what I consider an emerging market. Right now you've got medical, you don't have rec. And what we're learning in the US is that the really, really advanced markets, the Colorado, the Oregon, California, Alaska, bless you, these markets are in a race to the bottom. So cannabis is selling for less money, and it's really hard for operators to make money. But the markets that have limited licenses and that are new are the ones where there's limited competition, and those people have an opportunity to make money. So you're in a situation right now where Germany is technically an emerging market. You have an opportunity to limit the number of licenses, which I'm a proponent of having lots and lots of retail licenses and then having your bottleneck at the manufacturing, because that's where you can control quality, that's where you can control safety. But once you know you've got clean, safe, legal cannabis, sell it to the masses. So you limit the licenses at that manufacturing level, and you also allow as many distributors to exist as possible. So you get it to the people, because people are getting it anyway. So what I want to do is talk to you about what would happen if we are in a recession. How long is it going to last? Okay, I'm going to take a poll. How many of you think that this economic downturn is going to last longer than 2 years? 1 year? Less than 1 year? A few of you. Okay, the majority of you think it's going to last more than 1 year. The average, I looked at the last 5 bear markets. Starting in 2001, the amount that the market decreased was 37%, and it was 546 days. 2002, 278 days, 34%. 2008, 408 days, 52%. 2009, 62 days, that was COVID, 27%. And 2020, 33 days, 34%. The average bear market lasts 265 days, so less than a year. So let's say that the recession starts July 1st. It means that it'll be over sometime in March of 2023. I don't think that's, my prediction is that that's not what's gonna happen because of all of those things that I've told you about the war in Ukraine, supply chain, the gas situation in Europe. But what I'm saying to you is, if you have some liquidity, if you are an investor, cannabis is a great way to hedge inflation. It's a great way to diversify your holdings. It's recession resistant because it is going to go up in demand. And so you've got an excellent position in Germany. Get your legislators' minds right. Stop them from being fearful. We all see that the emperor wears no clothes. We've got to get our legislators to see that as well. And if we can get the entire cannabis community to understand that this is what we're facing, we can be the ones, this industry can be the ones that single-handedly help governments beat this recession. Thank you.
Jamie Pearson.